In Britain around the same time, we see a movement known as the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. This movement shares some elements with the realists and the American naturalists, although unlike them, they are largely inspired by literary subjects. However, the backgrounds and the details of their paintings often have realist elements. So in this example by John Everett Millais, we see he's painting Ophelia. So again, the reference here is to Shakespeare's Hamlet and to the character of Ophelia. And if you remember that play, Ophelia drowns herself about halfway through, and just before she does her last appearance on stage, she comes on stage and sings a song about wildflowers. So we see her here in this painting with that chain of wildflowers that she makes in the play in her hand, and the details of the plants and of the bank behind her are accurate to an English country stream in the late 19th century. Similarly, Millais had his model, a woman named Lizzie Siddal, pose for this painting in the bathtub. And once you know that, we can kind of see it in her position. Her two hands with the outward cock at the wrists are designed to kind of keep her in place and to hold her still within that bathtub. And then her head would be resting on a pillow or a towel on the back edge of the tub. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood gets its name because they say that they are rejecting all art since Raphael. They really see Raphael and the artists of the Renaissance as having quote-unquote ruined art. And they look back to the art of the medieval period for inspiration, but they also draw inspiration from more recent movements, even if they wouldn't want to admit it, like the Romantics. So like the Romantic movement, they're interested in horror and the occult in the macabre. Some of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood are quite religious. William Holman Hunt is a good example of this. He actually travels to the Holy Land before painting this painting, The Light of the World. And in this painting, we see the figure of Christ. So this is a first religious painting we've really seen in a while in this class. And we see Christ knocking on the door. If we look closely at this door, we can see that there's no doorknob on the outside. And this is symbolic of the fact that you, according to Christian doctrine, have to open your heart to Christ, or you have to let him in. And again, just like with the Millais painting in the last slide, we see that Holman Hunt bases the plants, including some of the plants in the background, on actual plants and actual materials that he sees in the Holy Land. The leader of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was this painter, Dante Gabriel Rossetti. And Rossetti was born in Britain, but with Italian parents. So much of his inspiration actually comes from Italian literature, including Dante. And the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood originally also embraced medieval ideas like a secret society. In the earliest version of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, artists agreed to not sign their names on their paintings and to just sign them as PRB. And that didn't last very long. Fairly quickly, the identities of the members of the PRB become publicly known. But there's still a certain mysticism or kind of secret element to the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And they often use this kind of mystical element as an excuse for non-conventional behavior. So Rossetti met Lizzie Siddal, that model from Millais' picture that we saw at the beginning of this video, when she was working for Millais, and almost instantly falls for her. They have a 10-year on-again, off-again, quite tempestuous engagement, which was quite unusual at this time. But they do eventually marry. Shortly after their marriage, we think that Lizzie Siddal becomes pregnant and she miscarries, likely because she's addicted to opiates. And then, shortly before this picture is painted in 1863, she dies, again of an overdose of opiates. And it's unclear if this was an intentional suicide or an accidental overdose. Some historians think it's possible that she had a second miscarriage shortly before her death, and so either one seems probable. But Rossetti paints this picture in a fit of grief, and he shows his wife as Beatrice, the object of the love interest for the narrator in Dante's Inferno, in Dante's Divine Comedy. Most people today only read the Inferno because that's the part that's in hell. It's more interesting to modern readers, but if you read all three parts of the Divine Comedy, the narrator figure and his guide Virgil go not only through hell, but through purgatory, and then eventually paradise, and at the end of the poem, they catch a glimpse of Dante / the narrator's deceased love interest, Beatrice, and that's the scene that Rossetti shows us here. We see these shadowy figures in the background that are meant to represent the narrator, or Dante, and Virgil. And in the foreground, we see the figure of Beatrice, who's clearly Lizzie Siddal. She's a fairly distinct figure. Once you've seen her a couple times, you'll start to recognize her. She has a strong jaw and quite a large nose. Her figures were more handsome or distinctive than they were really beautiful. And she has enormously long red hair. She actually popularizes red hair in women. Before this, it was seen as something that was fairly undesirable, actually. And Rossetti can't resist giving just a few hints about who this actually is and how she died. So if we look at the bird that's perched on her lap, we can see that in its beak it holds two items: a wedding ring, hinting at their marriage, and then also a poppy, the source of opium. So here again we see just a few realist elements here, even in a quite literary and autobiographical painting. Ultimately, by the mid to late 19th century, artists are starting to become more experimental, and they're starting to embrace new ways of expressing themselves, new ways of exhibiting their paintings, and new ways of practicing art as a career, and we'll see more about that as we start to talk about the Impressionists next class. But this is still at least somewhat within that realist sphere.